Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Andrew's Totalities with the Red Pill Religion podcast. Today we have a friend from Twitter, Brave Justice.
Yep. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys.
And Brave is a panentheist, which is a very interesting view of God that, in some ways, is very different than the Christian understanding, and in some ways is more similar than some other views like deism or pantheism. And of course, we have our own Josh Brister on as well. Say hi to everyone, Josh.
Yeah, hi, it's really good to be here, and thank you very much.
So let's go ahead and get things started, Brave. What is your sort of theological position in view of God and his or its relationship to the universe?
Yeah. Obviously, I would like to say that it's an ever-changing view. It really is. I mean, I definitely started off. I actually went to seminary. I went to a pretty conservative fundamentalist seminary, and the more I learned, the more I reflected, and the more I engaged with other people, especially other people of other beliefs, the more I started changing my own. So even though I would classify myself as a panentheist at this moment, my views and my ideas are always changing. And I think that's the beauty of the journey of getting to know God, or, becoming one with whatever made us, whatever created us. Because when I say God, I'm referencing a mystery, because I don't claim to have knowledge about this mystery. So although I have my beliefs, and my beliefs would be faith, I don't claim knowledge to specifics about that claim. So for me, God, the word God, God, is a reference to a mystery, and this mystery is the mystery that created us. Now if you were to you know um, push a little more on that for me to get into detail, I would say things like, I think there is a ultimate uncreated source. I think that this source is a pervasive source, that it's in everything. I would actually say, and this is going to get a little mystical, but this is my beliefs, and I'm proud of my beliefs. Um, I would say something along the lines of, when we get down into the microscopic, when we get down into these fundamental levels of reality, if we get down to the closest that we can view today, it's something like energy, right? Something like vibrations. And if you look at the most popular Big Bang theories that are accepted today, there's a singularity, a density, right? I mean, the second law of thermodynamics, energy conservation, is something like energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So for me, there is an eternal peace that has existed for all eternity, that is actually, if you break down the levels of reality, is holding everything together. Everything is made of atoms. Inside of atoms is just these little signature energy bits, depending on your view of waves and quantum physics and whatnot. But for me, there's something that keeps us all together. There's something that holds us together as one, and for me, that's God. But
Yeah,
yeah.
and I would say, coming from sort of the classical Christian tradition or of Anglicanism and the ancient church, that everything you said is correct. That the entire universe depends on each instant on God for keeping everything together, and that God is eternal, and that there's no place without God. So basically, I think you're right in your beliefs, and just as you were sort of articulating, we can't know God, we can't fully grasp God with the intellect, right? But we can touch God with the intellect. So it's sort of like you can't grab a mountain with your hand, but you can touch a mountain with your hand. And there's something that we can we can sort of glimpse or articulate some of our knowledge, but a lot of it comes through mystical direct experience and can't be described in the same way. So far, I think that you're dead on, and that this is the correct view to take of God. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, and my theology, if anybody's ever interested in it, comes from process theology. I've taken some of process theology and incorporated it into my own beliefs to be able to articulate what I believe and my existential positions. But if you're ever interested, process theology, there's a guy by the name of John Cobb. He actually wrote a book on. It's called Abba. You'd be surprised how pervasive Christianity has been in the process theology dialogue. It's actually very Christian. Before that, it came from Whitehead, though. If you're familiar with Whitehead, who was a physicist, and he started talking about, we use Newtonian metaphysics to describe our reality, and he started making once we started figuring out quantum physics and we started getting new data into these new levels of reality, he started using different metaphysical uh, descriptions of reality, and then he brought this into a culmination of a philosophy. And then after that, after he passed away, cats like John Cobb and Charles Hartshorne, if you've heard of him, they kind of grabbed a hold of his philosophy and mixed it with Christianity, and it merged into what today you could read about as process theology. So that's what informs me, and it's very much has an influence of from Christianity. I mean, everything does. I see you guys on Twitter constantly, and apologists are rightfully, in my opinion, they're right to point out to most atheists who hold some type of moral framework that their moral framework is informed by these Christian values if they were not aware of that. That's Jordan Peterson's argument usually every time he's talking to somebody in that context. So my own view, I'm very proud to say it's influenced by the Christian tradition, because as much as I despise brainwashing and I believe that religion is a tool for that, I do recognize still that the Christian tradition and the Christian metaphysics it's popular for a reason, because it does a lot for us. It provides a lot of value, and the tradition itself provides a lot of value. I saw you guys talking about it today about or a few tweets, maybe it was yesterday, but about adoption. About how Christianity really um, got popular by them adopting the civilians or the population that was thrown out of Rome. Whether it be the baby or whatnot. But there's actually a great book if anyone's ever interested. It's called The History or The People's History of Christianity. And I think it's by Diane Butler Bass, but she's a progressive Christian. A lot of my influence comes from progressive Christianity as well. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that.
A little bit. I have some issues with it, but I do agree with you that and Christianity, when it's at its best, is about teaching people how to pursue truth rather than blindly following things through submission of a teacher's authority. We can dive into religion a little bit, and what is the good of religion, what is a good religion and what isn't. And I actually have a sort of a bit of a bias against fundamentalist Christianity for various reasons, but oftentimes you do end up with these cultures that turn the religion into a cult, right, and use it to do things that are harmful or use it as a pretext for harmful things. And the thing that you seem to, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me that you realize that the question of God is in some sense a different question from whether a specific religion is true or not, right? That your beliefs of God are not, in some sense, are separate from your views of religion.
Right on, man. That you articulated that so well. I actually had a discussion with so as I was going through seminary, I started learning Greek and Hebrew, and I started reading more Greek than anything, but I started reading documents on my own, started studying the textual criticism, kind of got outside of the walls of the influence within, the safe circle of guys you can study. And I started my own deconstruction, and along with that deconstruction came, me and my community, because I was in a church, I was becoming a pastor, and I was talking to somebody in the church council and the staff, and I was telling them about how, because I was questioning Christianity. I was questioning the core doctrines, and he said, "You're questioning God." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not questioning God at all. Honestly, if I didn't have this idea of God, if I didn't have my faith, I wouldn't even be where I'm at. I mean, you may not know much about me, but I was in the military, bro. I did 3 tours, and 2 of them were in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. We got a presidential unit citation for the amount of people we lost. So I had a lot of ideology. I had a lot of my own experiences that I just had to deconstruct, right? And so if I didn't have God in my faith, I wouldn't have been able to get through to it today to where I can articulate this stuff. But for me, talking to somebody that wasn't understanding, like exactly what you said, that they didn't understand that there's a difference between questioning the doctrines of your religion and then questioning that there's this idea of God or this fatherly presence or whatever words you use to describe God in. And I just found it so interesting. He was I think he was in his 50s or 60s, so he's a couple generations in front of me. But I just found it interesting that for him it was like a place of cognitive dissonance. He wasn't even like, his brain did not let him see that there was a difference between religions and God. And the way that I usually describe this when I talk to people, I take this from Joseph Campbell. If you've ever studied anything from Joseph Campbell, he's the world's most renowned mythicist, amazing dude. But he has this idea of God images that each one of us, or each one of our traditions or our cultures, have our own God image, what we think God is like. And as much as we would like to say these are right, that these ideas about God are right, when it really comes down to it, there is no way to confirm the truth on these beliefs. Now, of course, if you have presuppositions in your philosophy of divine revelation, then you would say you could be able to prove these things. And so I would then want to discuss the divine revelation idea. But generally speaking, outside of that, those axioms and those presuppositions in philosophy, generally speaking, there is no ability to know the truth about God. Because to know the truth, by definition, right now we're going to get into epistemology and ontology and justify true belief. There is no methodology, right? Methodology to confirm things about God or not. There isn't. So to have a sense of faith in this idea about God, while at the same time questioning doctrines or ideas that have come out of your tradition about God, it's funny to me, and you said it as well, it's just how people are not able to separate those two concepts from each other.
Yeah, and I'll just respond to that and then give Josh a chance to talk. That in my tradition, at least, we have a separation between what is called general revelation and special revelation. And general revelation is sort of what Joseph Campbell is talking about, that every culture has an image of God that they construct through their own experience. And if you do comparative religious studies of things from like even Native Americans and African spiritual practices and Confucianism and stuff, you find some key like similarities, right? Like that God is often articulated as a fatherly presence, for example, and this understanding of God as the ground of being. There's an association with God and goodness, and that God is goodness and God is truth. And so in one way, I agree with you that through general revelation we cannot know God fully, and that God has to condescend to come upon us and to make himself known. And that sort of grace, I think, is actually available to everyone. I mean, Socrates wasn't a Christian, but he had a deep understanding of God and morality and truth and ethics. And the same is true of Confucius, and I've met Native American and heard Native American oral traditions that have the same sorts of things. And so I think that this is sort of a key part that we probably disagree on, that I think that human epistemology, or our ability to know God, even in a general revelation sense, is stronger than you seem to have articulated. Josh, do you have anything to add?
Well, I wanted to first commend you for your time in the military and those tours of service you did. That's a really great thing.
Yeah, thank you for your service and taking such significant risks on the part of all of us civilians. So thank you.
It's
I appreciate you guys saying thank you, but I would like everybody to know, because I don't want this narrative to be the ruling narrative, that we're over there protecting your freedoms or our freedoms or something. We're not. Maybe in the romantic, you know, uh, metaphorical sense against terrorism, because there's terrorism over there, sure, but there's terrorism everywhere, right? We've been seeing it in our own country. So it's really this myth
Oh
that's
yeah.
been given to us since Vietnam, because people didn't support the troops really, because they were over there, doing some things that are, outside of the context of just war. So I get it, but I just want everybody to know, because I'm actually a history teacher, and I always let people know. I do think I appreciate you guys saying thank you, and I understand why you guys say thank you. But I want everyone to know that these interventionist wars that we're taking part in, we're spending our tax money and our tax dollars in, they're not to protect our freedom. They're not. And if people think
Well,
that, then they're fooling themselves.
yeah,
World War
and
II for sure, and maybe
mhm,
maybe communism to threaten Cold War. Maybe you could justify that, but you know what I'm saying? Look, watch. Let me just say this one thing about this, and we can move on.
sure.
OIF, right? I actually did my deployments in Afghanistan, but OIF, which is the war, because there was a two-front war over there, right, in Afghanistan and Iraq. The war in Iraq is called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Okay, but if you look at the history of why we went to Iraq, it was because supposedly Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which ended up being not true. But they've named the name of the war Iraqi freedom, almost like we're freeing people over there. And of course, some people could say he was a dictator, blah, blah, blah. He did have some dictator qualities, but a lot of people did like him. Just like any type of president, people are going to like him and people aren't. They democratically elected him, let him do their thing. But the point is there's always a constant narrative trying to be told to us. And for somebody of myself who's been over there, who's actually done it and now coming back, I don't ever want this to happen again. So one thing that needs to happen is the awareness of this idea that we're somehow in interventionist wars over in Muslim countries, that this is somehow protecting our freedom, because it's not. And I need to make sure that that gets cleared up, so my sons don't have to go fight in something stupid like that, or your own children.
Oh, I agree 100%, and you're exactly right that I don't think any modern world has met the criteria for a just war. Um,
yeah.
that America is engaged in. But at the same time, that doesn't lessen the that you did your duty and that other veterans did their duty, even if our leadership has not done the right thing. You guys did.
For sure,
Hmm.
for sure, and we're honor bound. I did this because I love people. That's what essentially, when I got out the military, I went hardcore into Christianity, because Christianity, it's got a lot of jacked up stuff that's came out of it, but at the core of it, is a non-violent movement led by a revolutionary person, Jesus. So it it had so many qualities that I wanted of myself, and that's why I went towards it. So
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, and I also think that's what Alfred North Whitehead also said. That was one of his points when he was at that meeting, that seminar, I believe it was in 1925 with Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, the staunch atheist, couldn't understand when Northhead what was talking how that it was because of the medieval Christianity, the Christian basis for how science arrived, and that's what he said. And a lot of atheists, don't understand that. Just listening to you, I think we all have a lot in common. Me and Andrew, we're associated with something called red pill religion. I'm sure you probably know of that. I think you might fit in there actually because we do agree on so much. Now, I do think that there is some significant differences. Um, for example, you said there's no methodology to confirm things of God. Um, I was going to say the same thing that Andrew said. We have a general basis, that general revelation through natural theology, which we can find, have an apprehension of things. Maybe we can't fully comprehend the minute things in God's mind about everything through general revelation, but we can broadly say that God does exist. He's designed the universe and is the basis for objective morality. I think it just goes back to trusting our cognitive senses, just as we can affirm things like uh, the laws of thermodynamics or the first law of thermodynamics, which you mentioned. I think we have a good basis just from general revelation to trust that we can understand things about God through His created order.
Yes, I would agree with that, but I don't agree, and I used to. I am not, trying to call this a position that, I'm downgrading or something because I used to hold the position myself, but I don't believe there is a way to know specific things about God. For example, Yahweh. How do you know that it's Yahweh that is the creator of the universe, right? And people would say, because of special revelation, the prophets, whatever, whatever, whatever. But you had said something interesting when you said you're talking about God and the basis for objective morality. But one of the I have a couple instances in my theology where I kept like getting knocked down in a sense. If you ever look in Wikipedia in the modernist versus fundamentalist historical event that went down around the 1920s, if you look in the Wikipedia, there's actually a picture and it has like a guy on stairs and he's like stepping down and it's like it's like Christianity and then it's like I forget exactly but he like keeps stepping down and at the bottom of the step is atheism, right? So like for me, my journey a couple steps down, one of them was having to wrestle, and I've already read Paul Copeland's books, because God a Moral Monster. I've taken many courses on this. Like I said, I have I have a bachelor's. It was actually a 5.5 year degree because I ended up having to leave the seminary because they weren't going to let me graduate anymore because of my liberal theology. But I have a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, so I've spent a lot of time on these ideas, and for me, the objective morality claim, and then I do believe there's an objective morality. Personally, I do, but I understand that we can all arrive at the the idea of objective morality differently. But where it's getting grounded in God, I would ground it in God, but I would keep it at a mysterious source of God because once you ground it in Yahweh, now there's some big problems. For example, if we open up the scriptures, we have First Samuel chapter 15 verse 3 where Yahweh gives the command to Saul to slaughter everybody, pregnant women, infants. It says even every suckling, every animal that's alive. And then actually Saul doesn't do it, and so Yahweh's upset. So my critique with that for that would be, if you're grounding objective morality in Yahweh, that would mean everything that Yahweh does is objectively morally good. Okay, there would be no way that this God could do an action that would be objectively morally wrong. If it's if this is the ground of objective good. So when this God gives the command, because right when we're talking about morality, we're talking about actions. So whenever the command, the action is given to the human, now watch what happened to objective morality. Watch, because before it was always wrong to slaughter an infant. Are we agreement that it is always wrong to slaughter an infant?
And I think that I'll pop up one level of abstraction real quick. The question is objective morality fundamentally deontic? Or is it virtue ethics, or is it something like utilitarian? So the assumption here is that that you're sort of articulating is that the objective morality is a deontic one, and that when God ordered like the destruction of the Amalekites, right, and their entire destruction, that since he was ordering something that violated this higher law, that was immoral. That's what it sounds like, but I want to confirm that that's sort of what you're articulating.
Well, not just for this God character Yahweh in the story, but for the human. Watch, okay? So if something is objective, that means it can never be the opposite of that, right? If something is objectively true, that means it can never change.
Well, I'm not so sure of that.
Okay, well
We
then we need to explain our idea of
we,
objectivity then.
well, our understanding may be flawed. That's the epistemological way, but the ontology, uh, there must be something. So if God commanded something, if that is really historically true that God did command that in 1 Samuel 3, um, then we have to look at the history and everything. We simply can't make a statement otherwise. But God
Well,
in that case would be the rightful authority to take life since He created all life.
sure, and that would be a divine command theory which is not in representation. That's why we need to hammer down this idea of objectivity. For example, it is objectively true that God exists and that God cannot exist, right? Both all of our ideas on here that our idea of God, it is impossible for God to cease existing. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes.
Okay, that's objectively true. That can never change. Okay? So morality in the same sense, it is objectively true that you it is never the right thing to do to slaughter an infant.
We have a finite, limited understanding because of who we are, and because if we take our sin nature honestly and sincerely, we have problems with our faculties and understanding what indeed is the right or wrong thing in any given particular circumstance. So I think it's not a sign of humility to show that we ourselves could see what's objectively true or false in every particular situation. I think I think we have to presuppose a maximally great being that is the arbiter of objective morality. And
What
I don't,
It
I
is,
don't.
but
Well,
your
let me
argument
finish.
doesn't. Okay, for sure.
By the way, I don't think process theology has that, because process theology is always in the stage of becoming something or evolving. It's never that maximally great being. So with a maximally great being that Christians have, we have a justification for that, and I don't think process theology does.
Well, I would like to say that my own ideas about God or about this world, these existential questions that we're answering, are informed by process theology. But my views are not process theology. I am not process theology. I am my own person. I get to have my own views, and so these views are informed, just like they are informed by Christianity and other philosophies. But it is not that. So just want to make that distinction. And then I would like to say I agree with what you're saying about not having the ability to understand the objective truth in every scenario. I agree with you, but we do have an understanding of what objective is. I believe this, and you guys believe this too. Somebody had just said this earlier, but we have been made by the designer in a way that we can trust our cognitive facilities. Even if you are under some kind of substance, you could trust that you are under some kind of substance, and so therefore you would be still trusting your cognitive facilities, even though you would know that some of the interactions in reality may not be true because you're under some type of substance. But even then, you're still trusting it. So it always works. You you trust in your cognitive facilities. I trust in the way I was designed. I trust my creator that I can know this world, so I can know objective truth about this world. Now,
Well,
we're talking about
let me
presuppositions. Hold on, let
let
me
me
finish
correct.
this time. I
All
let you
right.
finish last time. Let me finish this time. So when we're talking about presuppositions, I would agree that objective morality in is grounded in God. But what I do not agree with is labeling that God Yahweh, because it gives you problems. Because hold on, let me just finish and I'll be done in about a minute real quick. Because once you say that now everything that this God Yahweh does is good, now when we look in the scriptures and we have stuff like, oh, this God commanded infant genocide, killing pregnant women, slaughtering them all. Now you're forced to say that that act of genocide was the morally right thing to do. And I will never, ever, ever, ever do that, because I think that is, you're actually doing God a disservice. I know God doesn't need to protect himself, but when you say that stuff about God, that's why most people are atheists, because they're like, that's disgusting. How could that be the morally right thing to do? Because my philosophy, you wanted to bank it into process theology, but my philosophy can still have my idea of objective morality banked in God, and at the same time, I can speak against genocide as being immoral and never right. But you can't on that side because Yahweh told you it was the right thing to do. So just like I asked my librarian at San Diego Christian University, where I got my bachelor's degree, I asked him, if Yahweh told you to kill my infant son, would you do it? He said yes, he would have to do it, because if Yahweh told him to do it, it is the right thing to do. Any theology that tells you to kill a child needs to go as fast as it can. See you later.
Okay, so one of the key things here is the signs of what is a actual legitimate special revelation and not, right? So let's say that we agree that God is good, right, and is the highest good thing there is, and do you believe that it can be said of God that he's like perfectly wise, or that if you actually got a legitimate order from God, it would be the right thing to do?
Well, I don't think God gives orders, and I think that when we're referring to God as Father or wise or love, these are just the scratching, like you had said it about the mountain. I like that analogy, but it's just the scratching of the surface. So I wouldn't even try to pretend that I could know these things about this God, because that's
Sure,
just
but
not being humble. If we're gonna be humility, we're gonna rest in humility, like Christianity teaches. The first thing I need to do is recognize that the creator of this world made it in such a way that I cannot know things about this God in the same way that I can know other things about this reality. Just like I can
mhm.
know objective reality. That's how I know Yahweh is not the real God, because the real God would not be commanding infants to be slaughtered and say that's the morally right thing to do. That's just that idea. Not to mention, there are plenty of Christians who believe in the resurrection and everything who would say that that event in the scriptures actually really didn't even happen. So it gets really convoluted if you're taking these presuppositions that this Bible is your special revelation, and
So,
that's why I
so,
fall off
mhm.
the course
Uh,
of the special revelation conversation.
so, do you believe that it's logically possible for God to give special revelation?
Well, let's see. It depends on your idea about God, because I'm sure in your idea about God it's logically possible,
Yeah, yeah.
but
I'm
my
thinking.
idea about God
Yeah,
doesn't do
you're
that.
okay, but he implanted in your heart this moral law, right? Your
Well,
understanding of
not just in
morality.
my heart, but I think it's in my DNA. Because I mean, I've seen people die.
Sure.
I've seen people freeze up. Like
Uh,
you get a general
in the core of
reaction
your being
from.
is what I meant.
Yeah, you'll
Yeah,
even
I
like
meant your
shudder. You'll get chills. Like it's in our design somehow.
sure, sure, but right. But you see the connection there, that part of you that's innate and totally in your being, you have full trust in because it came from God, right?
Yes, yes, that's exactly why I would reject the idea that God would command infants to be slaughtered, because I
Sure,
do
sure.
trust in my feeling. Yeah, 100%.
So just thinking about this hypothetically,
Hmm.
what let's say there was some other mechanism for God to go in and say that, okay, in this case, you're in moral error, right? And was able to make it clear to you why that was the case. Would you follow that other mechanism potentially? Or could you imagine someone following that mechanism that God somehow corrected or changed, that might be in conflict with your prior understanding of it?
Yeah, and I think that's what Paul went through. Paul was taught at first that his God was all about killing people. And then if you do the studies on Paul, he actually took like and scholars are in disagreement about how many years he took off, but he took anywhere from like 2 to 4 years off to just like rethink his whole life. Like, I know the feeling. I
Sure.
killed people and then had to come and reconcile it. So he he thought that that was the way God wanted it to be. When he met Jesus, he had a whole different idea about God. So I agree with you
I
were
don't.
saying, but what I would say is, along this journey, and it gets a little mystical here, and I'm okay with that, but if I was led by a sense of good or a sense of love, then yeah, I would turn away from some ideas that I have. But if I'm getting some idea that you're trying to confirm or to try to mark as confirmation that, oh, in fact, it is the right thing to do to slaughter these people, like the librarian said he would slaughter my son if God told him to. If God tells you to slaughter people, if you think that God's telling you that, which there's been a couple, you can Google them in the news. There's
Mhm.
a lady who killed her two children. She thought God told her. If you're thinking that, you should go get mental help, because God would never do that. Especially if Jesus is the image of God, because it's one thing to have Yahweh as the image of God, and I know the majority of people would make Yahweh, Jesus, God as one, and Holy Spirit in the Trinity. I get that, but there's also other ideas about God out there, and there are some people out there about the idea of God that would be in Jesus so much that Jesus would never command children to be slaughtered. At least not the Jesus in the Gospels, because the Jesus in the Revelations is a little different. But regardless, this character in the Gospels, Jesus, who we attribute this movement being started by, he would never command infants to be slaughtered. So then why would we say that if
Well,
our image of God is
let me
Jesus?
go back on that. First of all, Jesus had a very high view of the Old Testament, and I think the question is rightful authority. Now, it would be wrong for you, a mere man, or me, a mere man, to kill anybody. But if God, the author that created life, that created everything, if He decided or commanded for in a particular historical situation to kill somebody, then it seems that God Himself would be the rightful authority. The
I could agree with you on that.
proper humility would be for us to step back and look at the overall historical credibility of the biblical narrative, not in isolation, but let's ask: is Christianity true? If Christianity is true, and how Christians argue this mostly is from the resurrection, then we can
Mhm.
trust that God has given us a reliable
Well, even that, I
testimony
don't think
about
that
Himself.
follows. There are plenty of people, Martin Luther King Jr. is one. There are plenty of people that would believe that the resurrection happened and that this Old Testament was just their view. When they're
All
claiming
right,
God told them to kill somebody, that was their justification to go and do it. Because watch, this is what's so interesting, and I want you guys to be honest with yourselves about this.
you too. We
Without
need to have humility here and not think that we know or that we have the legitimate authority to say what God and God could not
Well,
do.
Okay, I agree, but just let me pose this really quick, because it's going to be a thinker for you. If we didn't have this idea of special revelation and this idea of, because you could still technically believe it, because I don't know if you guys know, the word theos neustos, that you get this idea of special revelations from, theos neustos in 2 Timothy 3:16. This word theos nusos is a made-up
Yes.
word. Paul made it up. You can't even find it in any other Greek literature. So really, what does it mean? There's actually 5 ideas within academia that define what this idea theos nusos could mean. One of them is like an inerrant revelation, but there
Well,
are
hold
other
on. This
ideas that.
this is going. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think first of all, I think all of us need to keep our answers relatively short, and I do think, with all due respect, I'm Brave. I think we're getting a little off topic here, and I want us to go back to the topic and maybe just take a breather for 1 second and try to get back
Yeah,
to the
we're
topic.
about 15 minutes off away from our deadline,
I
but
think it's been
let's
a
go ahead
very
and
good,
just take.
informative question. Just if you guys
Oh
will,
yeah,
just let me finish
yeah,
this
yeah.
one point, and then we can go wherever, or we can
Please do.
just tie this up and do
Yeah.
a part 2.
Well,
Because I think
let's
people
should
on
we
both
go
sides of the
let's
aisle
go
will
back
love this conversation. But
let's
this
go
is
back
just
to
the key point to
process.
everything I was saying, though. Hold up, before we go anywhere, because this is huge. This is like your guys' theology. I want you to see this. If you did not have this scripture saying that God commanded infants to be killed, nobody in their right mind ever would ever think that that's what God is like. The only reason why you have to say that it was the right, morally objective thing to do to slaughter infants is because you have this theology with
I
presuppositions that
disagree.
tells you this
let
is
let
true.
me let me
But
let
let
me
him
let me
finish. Josh, let
That's all
Brave
I
finish.
needed. That's all I
And
needed. That's all
okay.
I needed.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think Christians generally base it on perfect being theology. If God does exist and He's given us a trustworthy revelation in the New Testament, and we, through the process of historical studies, we can come to a realization and understanding that the resurrection is the most plausible, alternative, or the most plausible explanation.
Sure,
Then
but it
it
doesn't.
goes.
That
Let me
doesn't
let
mean
me
that the Old
finish now.
Testament is
Hold
all
on.
true.
Let me
That's
finish with all due respect. Then you can come and argue from the goodness of God and say that God would give a generally reliable account in both the Old and New Testament, something that we could know. So maybe again, uh, all these things you're picking out, you're taking them out of their historical context and not looking at the overall picture of Christians saying the resurrection is what gives the whole biblical narrative plausibility.
well. This is the problem with that,
So,
though, because when this event happened, there wasn't
I would
even
just
the.
like to respond to Brave's the hypothetical.
I'll 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 get one response after
So,
you're done, and then we can
and
finish this up.
I don't. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sounds good. Go ahead, Brave.
Okay, yeah. So,
Oh, okay.
do you want me to go or you want to go? It doesn't matter.
You go, Brave.
Okay, cool. Um, just a couple things. So, historically speaking, in academia, if you get outside of the fundamentalist tradition in academia and you look at both sides, there's very good evidence that says that that event in First Samuel didn't even happen. Okay, there's actually a scripture in Jeremiah 8:8, which says, "You think you have the Torah, but what you really have is the false pen of the scribes." Okay, he's letting you know that this law, this book that you have, be careful because it's not what you think it is. So to say that because Jesus was resurrected by God, because I'm not arguing that point right now. We can argue that in another conversation. But to say that that is true, and then because that's true, everything in the Old Testament is true, that doesn't follow. That's faulty logic. I can't believe that anybody that's so well studied as you guys come off would even fall for that.
Well, since that was to me,
So
let me give a
I'd
15
like a
second.
response for Josh. Oh, okay, Josh.
Well, again, just looking at it from a philosophical and theological humble position, and thinking of the goodness of God, if God did in fact resurrect Jesus from the dead, we have prima facie plausibility to look at the whole biblical narrative as somehow inspired and generally reliable, not inerrant, but generally reliable. Go ahead, Andrew.
So let's take your thought experiment, Brave, and let's say that we don't have Second Samuel or any like Near East war declarations or blotting out of the Amalekites or anything like that at the Old Testament, right? So let's look at what we know from God's nature in general revelation. Every single person that we know will die, oftentimes in very bloody, in very painful ways. So to claim that this shows that God is unjust, when if we look at nature, everyone dies no matter if they're innocent or not, I don't think this really fundamentally changes the problem of evil, right? That God allows evil in the world, and the key thing, at least in my understanding of Samuel and the other Old Testament wars, is that God, since he has perfect foreknowledge, actually knows the right things to order to bring about Christ and the salvation of the world. And so, in this sense, God, we were unable to judge God because God is actually powerful enough and knowledgeable enough to do something like utilitarianism and actually get it to work. He can take actions that in the short term, even in thousands of years, don't seem correct, but will bring about the salvation of the world in 10,000 years.
Well said, well articulated. So I think if we want to pick this up next time, we should pick up on how, on the one hand, you're arguing for the goodness of God, to then come back and say that's why God commanded infants to be slaughtered. Because it's one thing to say, we're all going to die, but we all agree there's an objective morality. And when a human being is slaughtering another human and a baby infant, I don't think you guys are understanding that. That's really crazy to sit here and say
Well,
that the creator of the universe, who's good,
look
would
at it this
command that. But
way.
yo, this is a great time to
Look at
dip,
it
because
this way.
actually my family just got here,
Okay.
brother. Pulled it up right now.
Sure,
But
sure.
yo, it was a fresh breath of fresh air, whichever way you want to say it. But it was very fresh to have a conversation with you guys, even though we disagreed. But it was
Yeah,
Yeah.
civil, and I think it was very informative. And I think that's
yeah.
what should be the main goal. Because if we both believe in God, then we both believe that this pursuit of truth, this pursuit of knowledge, is the pursuit of God. So I do appreciate that from both you gentlemen. Thank you.
Yeah,
Amen.
thank you, and we hope you're definitely back here. I certainly had a lot more to say. The goodness of God and about humility. I won't get it in right now, but thank you very much, and we look forward to having you back on potentially in the
Yeah.
Yeah,
future.
and I'm good with a couple hours next time, as long as we schedule it. If you guys are good on that too,
Well,
we can go a
maybe.
little bit
And
Sure.
longer.
next time,
Yeah.
I want to make sure our responses, and this goes for all three of us, and hopefully you can bring in somebody, will be a
Roger that.
lot shorter, so we can get carry on the conversation a lot more smooth.
Roger that. Sounds like wisdom. Sounds like you guys know what you're talking about.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
God,
gentlemen.
God
All
bless
right,
you.
take it easy.
thanks everyone for listening, and bye for now.